The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day so crushingly ordinary that its normalcy felt like a personal insult. The Seattle sky was a familiar, indifferent sheet of gray, and a light drizzle was misting the windows of our living room. It was in that room, the one we had spent 15 years painstakingly transforming from a builder-grade box into a home, that my wife, Chloe, informed me she wanted a divorce. There was no tremor in her voice, no hint of sorrow in her eyes, which were as clear and cold as glacial ice. It wasn't a confession whispered through tears. It was a pronouncement, delivered with the sterile efficiency of a corporate downsizing. We were standing on the hardwood floors I had installed myself, surrounded by the life we had built, and she was speaking to me as if I were a line item on a budget that needed to be cut. "It's over, Leo," she said, her voice crisp and final. She gestured to a thick manila folder resting on the polished surface of our coffee table, the one I had painstakingly restored from a flea market find. The wood grain, which I knew like the lines on my own hand, seemed to mock me. "I've retained counsel. These are my proposed terms." I didn't reach for the folder. I didn't have to. The glint of triumph in her eyes told me everything I needed to know before I read a single word. She was eager to recite her demands, presenting them not as a starting point for discussion, but as a ruthless list of acquisitions. She wanted the house, the very sanctuary my grandfather had gifted me the down payment for, a place he had dreamed his great-grandchildren would one day play. She wanted 80% of our joint savings, the substantial nest egg we had so diligently built together over the years. Then came the final blow. She was demanding spousal support for a minimum of 10 years, a figure so punitive it would financially devastate me, leaving me with almost nothing. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an unconditional surrender she was dictating. When she finished her clinical recitation, she leaned back against the plush cushions of the sofa we'd chosen together on a sunny Saturday years ago, a smug, unassailable confidence settling on her features. "And I don't want a protracted battle over this, Leo," she said, her tone laced with a false pity that stung more than any shout ever could. "Let's be pragmatic. You're a high school ceramics teacher. You make a comfortable living, but you can't afford a real attorney. My lawyer, Mr. Finch, will drown you in motions and legal fees before you ever set foot inside a courtroom. It's far more sensible for you to just accept these terms so we can both move on." I sat there, frozen, looking at this woman I had loved, this person I had shared a life, a bed, and 1,000 private jokes with. A glacial coldness, deeper than the Seattle rain outside, settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just about leaving me. It was about erasing me, about grinding me into dust and sweeping the remains away. She saw me as weak, as a gentle, unassuming man who worked with his hands, nothing more than a temporary obstacle to be swept aside on her path to a newer, shinier life. Her greatest weapon, the one she brandished with such absolute certainty, was my perceived inability to fight back. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I let it hang in the air, a testament to the chasm that had just opened at my feet. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had always brought me comfort, but now felt like a countdown to my own demolition. I finally met her gaze, carefully schooling my features into a mask of weary resignation. I gave her what she wanted. I uttered the 2 words she was banking on, the 2 words that would seal her victory. "You're right." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and palpable. She had won. The simple teacher wasn't going to challenge her. He was going to fold, just as she'd predicted. She stood, smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse, a garment I now realized was likely purchased for a life that didn't include me. "Good. I'm glad you're being sensible about this," she said, her voice already distant. "You'll be served with the official papers sometime next week." Then, without a backward glance, she walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the ruins of our life. Here is what Chloe knew with chilling accuracy. She knew I was a man of modest means. She knew that my teacher's salary, while steady, did not contain a hidden reserve of tens of thousands of dollars for a high-stakes legal war. She also knew I had an older brother, a man named Marcus. What she also knew, and what formed the very bedrock of her entire strategy, was that Marcus and I had not spoken in 9 years. Marcus is not a teacher. Marcus Hayes is a Leviathan in $1,000 suit. He is, without hyperbole, the most feared, most successful, and most expensive divorce attorney in the state of Washington. His name is whispered in the legal circles of Seattle with a mixture of awe and terror. He's a legal predator who views the courtroom as his personal hunting ground, known for dismantling his opponents with surgical precision and unrelenting aggression. And for the past 9 years, he was, for all intents and purposes, dead to me. Our falling out had been catastrophic, a bitter schism that occurred in the raw, grief-stricken aftermath of our parents' death. The conflict was over the family cabin, a beautiful old A-frame in the Cascades that our father had built with his own 2 hands. I, the sentimental one, wanted to keep it, to preserve it as a touchstone for our family, a place of memory and future gatherings. I could still smell the pine and the wood smoke from the stone fireplace. Marcus, the ultimate pragmatist, saw it only as an illiquid asset, a financial drain tying up capital that could be better utilized in the market. He wanted to sell it, divide the proceeds, and move on. The argument that followed was a terrible, brutal thing, filled with words that couldn't be unsaid, words that sliced deeper than any knife. It ended with us on opposite sides of a canyon of stubborn, unforgiving pride. We hadn't exchanged a single word since that day. Chloe had been there for the bitter end of that fallout. She had seen my grief and my anger. She saw me as completely, irrevocably cut off from the only powerful connection in my family. In her cold, strategic calculus, my greatest potential asset was a non-factor, a resource that was permanently offline. She was catastrophically wrong. For 5 days after her declaration of war, I existed in a fog of despair. The house felt cavernously empty, every room echoing with memories that now felt like lies. I'd walk past her side of the closet, already cleared out with unnerving speed, and feel a fresh wave of nausea. She was right about one thing. I couldn't afford to fight her, not with the kind of public defender or small-time lawyer I could hire. The thought of losing my home, my savings, the very foundation of my life, was a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. On the 5th day, a Saturday, I hit the bottom. The hollow echo of my empty future stared back at me from my own reflection in the dark living room window. And from that place of absolute emptiness, there was nowhere to go but up. I gathered every last shred of my pride, the same stupid, hardened pride that had cost me my brother for 9 long years, and I found his private cell phone number, a number I hadn't dialed in nearly a decade. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with my other just to press the numbers. I fully expected it to go to his voicemail, or perhaps to be answered by a sharp-tongued assistant paid to screen his calls. But after 2 rings, a familiar, deep baritone answered, a voice I knew as well as my own, yet rusted with years of silence. "Hayes, Marcus?" I said, my own voice sounding thin and foreign, a stranger in my own throat. It's Leo." A heavy, static-filled silence descended on the line. For a heart-stopping moment that stretched into an eternity, I thought he was going to hang up, to simply sever the connection and let the last 9 years of silence stretch into forever. "Leo," he finally said, the name sounding strange and unpracticed on his tongue. "What's wrong?" And like a dam breaking, it all came pouring out. I told him everything. The calculated coldness, Chloe's demands, the threats from her lawyer, Mr. Finch. I laid bare the entire humiliating ambush. And then I told him her final arrogant taunt, the linchpin of her whole plan. "You can't afford a real lawyer to fight me." Another long, pregnant silence stretched between Seattle and wherever he was. When he finally spoke, his voice was transformed. The surprise and caution were gone, replaced by something I hadn't heard since we were kids. Since the day he stood up to a bully for me in the schoolyard. It wasn't just the sound of a protective older brother. It was the sound of tempered steel being forged into a weapon. "She said what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, each word clipped and precise. I repeated her words, my voice cracking slightly with the remembered sting. "Okay," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a final judgment. When and where is the first court appearance? Next Monday. I told him, my voice barely a whisper. 9 a.m. at the King County Courthouse. I'll clear my schedule, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Do not talk to her. Do not talk to her lawyer. Do not sign a single piece of paper. Just be there on Monday. I'll meet you in the courtroom. We hung up. I sat there in the quiet house, my heart hammering against my ribs with a volatile mixture of abject terror and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Chloe thought she had me disarmed and cornered. She had no idea she had just unwittingly convinced me to press the big red button. She was about to receive a very costly, very public education on the true meaning of family. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned cold and gray, a miserable Monday that perfectly mirrored my mood. I walked into the King County Courthouse alone, feeling every bit the part of the defeated man Chloe expected to see. I was wearing my best and only suit, a charcoal gray number usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Today it felt like both. I found the designated courtroom, number 4B. Chloe was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked magnificent, a vision of corporate power in a sharp navy blue suit. Her blonde hair pulled back into a flawless, severe chignon. She looked confident, smug, and ready to execute a hostile takeover. Seated next to her was her lawyer, Richard Finch, a man in his late 50s with a florid face and a self-satisfied smirk that seemed permanently fixed in place. They were leaning in, sharing a quiet laugh as I entered. Her eyes met mine, and her smile faltered for the briefest of moments, replaced by a flicker of what looked like pity before she masked it. She probably expected me to look more shattered. I held her gaze, my expression a carefully constructed blank slate, and crossed the room to the defendant's table. I sat down, placed my worn leather briefcase on the table, and waited. Her lawyer, Finch, stood up and ambled over, his posture exuding an oily condescension. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice a low purr. "I'm Richard Finch. Glad you decided to show up. I trust you've had time to review my client's very generous proposal. If you're prepared to sign today, we can make this quick and painless for everyone involved." "I'm waiting for my counsel," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the judge's empty bench. He actually chuckled, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Your counsel? Mr. Hayes, let's not waste the court's valuable time. We both know you can't afford anyone who could possibly challenge this. Good luck with that." He sauntered back to his table, shaking his head with an amusement that made my blood run cold. A few minutes later, the bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense efficiency, entered and took her seat. She glanced down at the docket. "Case number 92C48, Hayes versus Hayes," she announced. "Are both parties present and represented?" Richard Finch shot to his feet. "Yes, Your Honor." Richard Finch representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Chloe Hayes. The judge looked over at me. "And the defendant?" Before I could form a response, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent room. Every single head swiveled toward the entrance. Walking down the center aisle was my brother, Marcus Hayes. He wasn't just wearing a suit. He was armored in authority, tailored from what looked like spun midnight and pure intimidation. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther, his gleaming, custom-made leather briefcase swinging at his side. A wave of whispers followed him down the aisle. "That's Hayes. What is he doing here?" As lawyers and staff recognized him instantly. His reputation didn't just precede him. It announced his arrival like a thunderclap. He didn't acknowledge anyone else in the room. His steel-gray eyes were locked on me. He walked directly to my table, placed a firm, grounding hand on my shoulder, and gave it a reassuring squeeze before sitting beside me. The briefcase landed on the table with a solid, definitive click. The sound seemed to reverberate in the stunned silence. I risked a glance over at Chloe. The smug, confident expression had been violently wiped from her face. It was replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief, as if she'd just seen a ghost walk in and take a seat at the opposing table. Her jaw was slack, her perfectly made-up face had gone the color of chalk, and her eyes were wide with a dawning, sickening terror. Her lawyer, Richard Finch, looked even worse. The color had drained completely from his florid face, his condescending smirk replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew exactly who my brother was. Every lawyer in the state knew. Marcus leaned over to me, his presence a fortress at my side, ignoring the gaping stares from the rest of the room. "Sorry I'm late, little brother," he whispered, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Traffic was a nightmare." Then he straightened up, his entire demeanor shifting to that of a commanding officer preparing for battle. He looked directly at the judge. "Marcus Hayes, Your Honor," he said, his voice a commanding baritone that filled every corner of the room. "Representing the defendant, Mr. Leo Hayes." The judge's eyebrows shot up. She knew the name. Everyone did. Then, Marcus turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Chloe. He looked at her, then at her terrified lawyer, and he gave them a cold, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. He let his gaze settle on Chloe, pinning her in place. Then he delivered the line that shattered her entire world. "He doesn't have to afford me," Marcus declared, his voice ringing with clarity. "I'm his older brother." The game hadn't just changed. It had been obliterated. Chloe thought she was attending a surrender ceremony. She had just walked, completely unprepared, into a perfectly executed ambush. Marcus opened his gleaming briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of files, and the demolition began. He immediately rejected all of her initial demands, declaring them predatory, punitive, and filed in bad faith, and announced our intention to file a comprehensive counterpetition. He stated for the record that we would seek a full forensic audit of all marital assets and expenditures for the past 5 years, and that Chloe should be held responsible for all of my legal fees. Richard Finch just stood there, stammering. He was a minnow who had just been cornered by a great white shark. The battle was over before the first shot was even fired. That first day in court was merely the prelude. The 6 months that followed were a masterclass in systematic, overwhelming legal warfare. My brother Marcus does not do things by halves. He doesn't just practice law. He wages it with strategic brilliance and overwhelming force. Chloe and her lawyer had planned for a quick rollover. Instead, they found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless assault. The first salvo was a motion for discovery that was both terrible in its scope and beautiful in its precision. It was an exhaustive demand for every single financial document Chloe had touched for the past 5 years. Finch's motion to have it dismissed as harassing was swatted down by the judge almost immediately. Chloe was legally obligated to produce every last receipt. She thought she was clever, but she had no idea she was dealing with a man who employed a crack team of forensic accountants for sport. While Chloe was drowning in paperwork, Marcus went after her character. He scheduled a series of depositions not just with her, but with her closest friends and colleagues. I sat through most of them, a silent observer watching my brother work. His strategy was simple. Apply polite, relentless pressure from all sides until the truth was squeezed out. The breakthrough came during the deposition of Chloe's best friend, Olivia. After 3 hours of ruthless questioning, Marcus leaned forward and slid a sheaf of papers across the table. "Let's talk about Mr. Julian Croft," he said. Olivia feigned ignorance until Marcus pointed to the credit card statements from a secret account Chloe had been siphoning marital funds into for nearly 2 years. The statements showed a pattern of luxury hotel stays in Vancouver, expensive jewelry, and intimate dinners for two. Faced with the evidence and under penalty of perjury, Olivia broke. Julian Croft, she admitted, was a wealthy real estate developer Chloe had been having an affair with for 18 months. Suddenly, it all made sense. The secrecy, the financial demands, the unshakable confidence. She was strip-mining our marriage to fund her new life with her lover. The deposition of Croft himself was even more illuminating. His initial arrogance crumbled under Marcus's questioning. He admitted to the affair and, most damningly, admitted that it was his idea for her to demand the house and exorbitant support, telling her that I would be too poor and too weak to fight back. With these sworn testimonies, Chloe's case was annihilated. A panicked Richard Finch called Marcus, begging to settle, saying Chloe was willing to walk away with almost nothing just to make it all stop. Marcus's reply was glacial. No, walking away is a privilege, and your client has not earned it. We are not settling. We are going to court and we are going to burn her to the ground. 6 months after I first walked into that courtroom, a man who believed he was about to lose everything, the final judgment was delivered. The hearing was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, Chloe had no choice but to surrender completely. The terms my brother drafted were an act of ruthless, poetic justice. Chloe was forced to relinquish all claims to the house. Her demand for spousal support was dismissed with prejudice. And because Marcus proved she had spent over $110,000 of marital assets on her affair, the judge ordered that full amount to be deducted from her share of our savings and returned to me. She left the marriage with a fraction of what she had originally demanded, a mountain of her own legal bills, and the public humiliation of having her scheme exposed in court. The fallout for her was devastating. Her lover, Julian Croft, vanished from her life almost instantly, his own reputation tarnished. Her friends, forced to testify to her lies, distanced themselves from her. In one fell swoop, she lost everything. All because she underestimated the quiet man she was married to. But the most important part of this whole chapter happened a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. Marcus called me. "Meet me at the cabin," he said. I drove out to our parents' old home in the Cascades, the very place that had been the source of our stupid 9-year feud. I found him on the front porch, just sitting on the steps, looking out at the pine trees. We didn't talk about the case or about Chloe. We talked about our dad's terrible fishing trips and our mom's incredible apple pie. Finally, after a long, comfortable silence, he looked at me. "I was wrong, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. "I was so focused on the money, on the asset, that I forgot what this place really was. It's our home." "I was wrong, too," I admitted, the words lifting a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I was so stuck in the past. I wasn't willing to see that maybe there was a different future for it. We didn't sell the cabin. We decided to keep it together. We've spent the last few weekends out there, fixing the leaky roof and restaining the porch. It's no longer a memorial to a past we fought over. It's a project for our future. Working side by side with my brother has healed a wound I thought would be a scar forever. Chloe's final, arrogant taunt was that I couldn't afford a real lawyer. Her greed, her hubris, and her certainty that I was weak and alone. That was the very thing that forced me to make the call that brought my brother back. She thought she was isolating me, but instead, she reunited me with the only family I have. She tried to leave me with nothing, but standing here today, with my home secure and my brother by my side, I realize she failed. I have everything that truly matters. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.